Welcome to our Mochi Podcast, the only podcast rated R for Robin. Today, my guest is Everett Muzzy, of Serotonin, I believe is the place you said you work.
Yeah.
Yep. He does the drugs in your brain. So you are currently on Fire Island.
I am. Yes, here for the weekend, for a quick trip. It's a friend's birthday, and it's a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And first weekend where all the restrictions are lifted. So it's another.
Oh yeah. Do you? So is everybody there already vaccinated? You have to take a ferry to get out there.
Yeah, I have to take a ferry to get out there, and usually, like earlier in the summer, you just had to show your proof of vaccination to really get in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But now, just with the restrictions lifted, it's completely back to normal, which is great. I mean, I don't know anybody who's not vaccinated.
So is everybody carrying like a paper with them? I honestly don't know how that is.
I think most people have the Excelsior pass for New York, which is the mobile one. But some friends of mine who got vaccinated elsewhere, honestly, they usually just have photos of their paper vaccine cards, and most places have been accepting that.
Mm-hmm. So do you have to like usually show them to like store owners, or like, you're not getting stopped by like the SS and like show us your vaccine shot?
No, not at all. No, the only places I've seen it have been to get into bars in the city or out here.
Mm-hmm.
But like stores and restaurants will take your temperature, but everything's been pretty relaxed for the last, I'd say, month and a half, 2 months, and now it's just essentially back to normal.
I think this is more for my own idle curiosity, because I'm not in the States. I'm very out of like what the norm is. So would you say that like things have like started getting more back to normal in terms of like activity, people outside?
Yeah, I absolutely think so.
Would you say that more people have been getting out? Because I know like there's been a concern about like the rebound in like travel and the eating out and like the garbage and shit too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically I have to compare it to 2019 summer, which, like, I don't know if I'm just making up those memories compared to 2020, but whatever we were allowed to do in 2020 for however limited it was, there were no lines to do anything, and most people were outside. They were, on the piers or in the parks in the city. And this summer, I mean, it definitely feels crowded. But I don't think it feels more crowded than things did in 2019. But I mean, just even beyond New York City, national parks are considering putting in restrictions on the people who can visit, because visitations are up 50% from last year, and they just can't handle all of the influx. And that's not even really taking into account all of the foreign tourism that usually comes to those parks, which right now isn't as robust as it usually is. So. If this keeps up, big things like parks are going to have to probably come up with measures to restrict people to enter.
Yeah, it's like here, people have kind of gotten back out, despite the fact that like most people in Ukraine aren't vaccinated. I actually recently got vaccinated. I got vaccinated last week. Kind of on accident. My wife was going to like get. She was going to get manicures, so I didn't like fall on a syringe or anything. She was going to like get manicures, and she saw like some sign up where like, oh, we're giving out vaccines, and she just called me like, hey, you should come here. They're giving out vaccines.
Wow, that's great.
It was very strange, and like I had to like convince them like, yes, I'm in the healthcare system here. This is my doctor or whatever, and they had to like call my doctor to like confirm that I'm in their system, and it turned out she was actually at that location helping out with vaccines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was pretty fucking weird.
Well, that's lucky. That's nice. That's great. So was this like a one shot, or you have to go back?
I have to go back in 3 weeks now. It's been a week. I got the CoronaVac, which apparently was approved by the WHO earlier this month. It's a Chinese vaccine. I think so far what I've been told, the only issue with it is that it hasn't gotten like EU approval yet, so it's not valid for travel and purposes in the EU, but in terms of prevention of the disease or getting COVID, it should be pretty effective.
Yeah. And did you feel fine?
Yeah, it was perfectly fine.
Nice. Yeah, that's
She
fine.
said like the only side effect was like, your arm might hurt because you got a shot.
Well, yeah.
But I've gotten fuckloads of injections since coming to Ukraine
hmm
for various different reasons.
Yeah.
It's not related to the country in itself. It's just out of odd circumstance. I was trying to get like dandruff treated, and
hmm
my wife like
There's a shot for that?
so it's like experimental slash like naturalistic. So kind of stupid. But
hmm
she was so my wife knew this dermatologist in our town who was like pretty well known, pretty well regarded, and she prescribed getting shots of ozone into my head. Yes, this is very strange.
Wow, into your head,
Yes, so
like into your scalp?
yes, into my scalp. She was inflating my head with
Yeah.
ozone.
What is ozone?
Um, it's like air from like super high up. I honestly have
Oh,
no
like
fucking clue.
the ozone.
Yes,
Oh, I thought it was some like cosmetic,
I don't think
I don't
so.
know, brand or something.
No, it's like
You
air.
mean like the
Yeah,
oh, okay, the ozone. Wow.
yeah. If you're wondering why
That
there are
seems pretty
holes in
wild.
if you're wondering why there are holes in the ozone, it's because they're injected into my fucking scalp. But yeah, I would go in like once a week and get like 10 shots in my head.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
I mean, I guess people do that for their face for Botox and stuff. And so I mean, I guess it's not that different. I just haven't heard of that before.
neither have I, and
I
like
wonder if that
it didn't help.
I
If
mean,
that tells you anything about
it
it,
didn't help. Okay.
no. And then I was also getting treated for like some skin thing on my fingers, and so like I had to give myself vitamin B injections, and those fucking hurt. It was like injecting
Ugh.
pure pain
You
into my ass cheek.
I was going to say you had to do it. I was wondering where you had to do it. Yeah, that sounds brutal.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd be able to do like the self-administered stuff. I'd probably just get like the heebie-jeebies, not be able to do it.
you scared of shots?
But no, not scared of shots. I don't know. I think the idea of doing it myself always weirds me out.
I guess I'm just more fucking
Then
metal
again,
than you.
I haven't done it myself. Yeah, right.
My wife was actually telling me that she thought it was really like manly. I'm like,
That you,
yeah, I'm basically the Russian gymnastics team.
yeah, right.
All right, so you work at Serotonin. You do marketing stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah. So Serotonin is mostly a marketing firm.
Hmm.
So under that, I run the content team there.
Hmm.
So yeah. So I mean, everything we do is mostly around marketing, and then my specific purview is content.
So it's mostly like writing articles, and kind of like dictating, or not dictating, but just kind of like sorting out what messages kind of need to get out about a product or a
Yeah,
project.
I'd say now with the team growing, my role is more of the latter.
Hmm.
It's just trying to keep my head wrapped around the state that all of these projects are in, and what any major upcoming announcements are, whatever their OKRs are, and then just making sure that whatever we're doing from a content side is actually helping push those things forward,
Hmm.
is super aligned with our media strategy, um, and yeah, and then making sure that the content team is deployed effectively across our clients based on what the individuals are good at, whether it's certain crypto subjects or of course bandwidth, and just making sure that people are moving along.
Hmm. How long have you been doing like writing stuff?
I mean, I've been writing forever. I was writing in college through my major,
Hmm.
and then
U.S.
I guess
history
my
and
first
anthropology,
job.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And then out of college, I guess my first job wasn't writing. It was just sort of a weird job that I fell into.
Hmm.
Um, and then when I was looking to move into crypto, the best way that I've the best way that I personally know for me to learn something is to just try to write it, to try to re-explain it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I find that if I start writing something, if I try to regurgitate a phrase or a sentence that I've heard,
Mm-hmm.
like let's say it was something like consensus mechanism, I could use that, but if I didn't actually understand what it meant, it would just sort of mean that, like what I was writing for somebody else wouldn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So my process has always been, as I'm writing something and I come across an idea, I stop writing, I research everything to figure out what that idea is, and then I can keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at the time with when I was learning about crypto, it was pretty not easy to do that, but it was manageable. Like you could
So how
get
did
online and learn.
How did you make that first transition? Like when did you start first like researching crypto stuff and like start writing in the space? I guess.
When I started writing in this space was 17, I guess, when I was sort of thinking about moving and
Sorry, can you say that again? The connection farted.
Oh, sorry. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I started writing about crypto in 2017 when I was looking for a job. And so I was like, I really need to understand these things more than just having, my vague understanding from prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started, actively writing a lot and reading a lot. And for better or for worse, I better when I can print things out. So I was running to my local, FedEx nearby when I was in San Francisco and printing out just like reams and reams of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so then I started, writing in 2017 for my own education. And then at that point, I was like, I just want to do anything I can to get into crypto. I don't actually care that much about what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was writing so much, I had all of these samples that I could send for content positions.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the content role at Consensus. I, fortunately had a couple people who knew people who were at Consensus randomly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at that point, Consensus was probably getting so many insane applications. So I think there was some sort of signal through the noise, and I joined, in early 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really think of like the writing aspect in crypto. To me, it's always like fintech programming. It's all front end, back end. No, I never really think too much about the article stuff, just because Investopedia is still trying their best to like wrap their head around like what the hell is blockchain. How would you say like how would you say like the writing in like the crypto space is like different from different spaces?
So I think early on when we were writing, and this was in 2017 and the earliest days of 2018, it was sort of one of those things where you could write almost anything and it was like going to move the needle a little bit just because there was so much hype and appetite. Even like
that was like around the first boom,
for
right?
these things. Yeah. It was the first boom, the ICO boom. And that was, very much big picture. Blockchain is going to save the world. So it was these, big sweeping commentaries on society and government and finance. And then sort of reframing it within these, core fundamental ideas, decentralization, disintermediation, sort of using these buzzwords. Sorry. And using these buzzwords like disintermediation, decentralization over and over and over again. And it was exciting. And I don't think that there's distruth to that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But when the bubble burst and obviously everything, free fell, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We started seeing a lot of not necessarily negative commentary, but just a lot more thoughtful commentary about, how do we actually make this grow? You're not going to go from nothing to adoption in a few months. And here are still what the actual problems are with blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
There was I think it was a McKinsey article that said, in 2019, blockchain will be boring, as sort of like a, hook to get people to read. And it was basically about the rise of, excuse me.
Bless you.
So it's basically about the rise, about the rise of enterprise blockchain,
mm-hmm.
and about how enterprise adoption is going to push the needle forward with blockchain because there's going to be so much investment.
So just like when companies are adopting the technologies for like data or whatever.
Exactly, like the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
like the cloud became a popular technology because companies started using it, and then it became more of a consumer focused technology. And we, as the crypto, space, we shifted, and we started writing a lot about enterprise adoption,
Mm-hmm.
a lot about private versus public,
Mm-hmm.
a lot about permissioned chains, sort of all of that discussion. And I don't think it's not that it wasn't interesting, because then you got into conversations around supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
You still got into conversations around government. You still had conversations about CBDC. Well, why am I forgetting the name? Central bank digital currencies,
Mm-hmm.
CBDCs. So it's not that it wasn't an interesting time, that it wasn't a like invigorating time to be in the space, but it is a mental shift to go from talking about here's with the world, as we as a society operate, and it's kind of fun, and you can get a lot more philosophical with your writing, and ask pointed questions and sort of get people thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and really just breaking down these big concepts. But with enterprise blockchain, what you are trying to do is you are trying to appeal to
A
the
specific like
CTO
case function.
of exactly. So you have to shift your language. You're not supposed to be using words like decentralization and disintermediation. You're supposed to be explaining why the architecture of a stack built with blockchain is better than the architecture of a stack
Yeah, it becomes far less
built
about like
without
the
blockchain.
hype. It becomes far less about the hype and more about the actual
Exactly.
application stuff.
It's cautious. It has to be measured. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we started seeing in late 2019, early 2020 was that we could reinvigorate the excitement around sort of the big picture,
Mm-hmm.
but we could do it in a very focused use case like DeFi.
Mm-hmm.
So then you started sort of finding the best of both worlds, or even best of like three worlds, if to the third point I'm about to say. So you could talk about, the big hype about how it's changing things, and you can compare TradFi to DeFi. You can sort of fit fintech in with, closer to DeFi. Talk about the evolution of the financial industry. You can talk about people, having access to banking solutions, even though they don't have them, but you can actually point to a really robust set of tools. And the best part is that you don't have to put it through an enterprise message. You can put it through a consumer first message,
Mm-hmm.
which I just think for amplification from crypto gets it from 0 to 60 a lot faster than having to say, okay, well, first this has to be, a long tail inward bound marketing plan to eventually hopefully get this, company to do something with blockchain, and maybe we get, a press release over the wire about it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you can just write about these really exciting concepts and make them super consumer focused, that takes us from 0 to 60 really quickly.
So, so
we
you mean
found
like
this
kind of
sort of-
shifting the focus to all, like small business owners, people with just like less access to banking and less control of over their own money.
Exactly. It doesn't even have to be. I mean, those are use cases that still exist, and,
Mm-hmm.
and they will be have a lot of banking services. But I mean, for people who are using DeFi, and I think it's probably good that we recognize this, that like DeFi is largely being used by people who are banked and are. It's not some panacea to the world's financial problems at all right now. But the legs are there, the possibilities are there. And from a content perspective, that means that we can sort of lean back into education, and it can be education on the perspective of, what's wrong with the financial industry. I do think there's a lot of, or there's not much financial literacy. And I'm most definitely speaking through like a North American, even
Mm-hmm.
just like American idea based off of just like my friends and the people I know. Just like financial literacy isn't actively taught a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we have the opportunity to do with something like DeFi is teach financial literacy with a spin on here are the pitfalls of it, and then present an opportunity, but it's not a theoretical opportunity. It's an opportunity that people can go to. So in the last part of that content is a tutorial. So it's here's how you actually set these things up and start using these things. I think that's a really attractive sort of user flow from somebody, from learning about it to understanding it to using it. And I mean, again, just from a personal work perspective, there's a role of content in every step of that along the way.
Yeah, I'd say it's a very like interesting I'd say the biggest comparison would be like trying to get a person to like learn economics without having them have to think about like, oh, this is going to be me, about how I'm supposed to learn to like invest, or how I'm supposed to learn how like how currencies flow between countries. Like
Yep.
there is a lot of things that immediately help the consumer that are accessible and are becoming more accessible, in my opinion, because of like blockchain stuff. But yeah, I think the messaging for that, it's super important. Getting that idea in their head that it's not just about like banking jobs. It's not just about public policy. It's about like you can actually control your money in ways that are reliable and transparent.
Yeah. And frankly, that's a lot more of an attractive message, and that's a message that people can understand. To your point, you can't teach somebody microeconomics and then they'll suddenly be prepared to do anything they want with their money, and like and it's not like you can jump from learning those concepts to investing properly, because you still have to navigate actually doing it on the ground. Whereas with DeFi, yes, I think there's value to teaching people these big picture issues, and I think there's probably we can all learn, and certainly I myself included. But we don't have to only do that now, as we did in 2017, because we can instead just point people towards an actual application. So instead of asking them to understand what the issues are and then hope for a solution, you can just point them to a solution right off the bat. And then it's almost like, they reverse understand how effective that solution is, and then, go back and understand how inefficient other solutions are the next time they try to transfer money between two accounts they own.
Yeah,
like Charles Schwab or something.
I wonder how much it's got to be like, kind of learning backwards from like getting a smartphone. Like most people, they get a smartphone and they just think like, I can call somebody, I can take pictures, I can Google and watch YouTube. But then like, then there's like the larger concept of like the interconnectivity of the the security issues, all of like the different like larger implications. But it's just like, hey, I can take a picture with my dick and put it on Reddit.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so what? They're still benefiting to that huge network of people, and they're still giving something to it, regardless of what it is. To your example, and that's fine. We don't need everybody to understand everything about global like interconnectivity or whatever any word people want to attach to it. All that matters is that people have a set of tools that they can use,
and it's making their lives better.
And it's making their lives better. So if that dick pic gets to who they want it to get to faster than it used to by mailing it, like,
take this letter to the post office.
Yeah, it's been a week sketching it. Post office. Steamboat across the sea. Yeah.
I think that's one thing that's particularly interesting to me. And correct me if I'm wrong, but something that's weird about crypto, the crypto space, blockchain stuff, like it didn't come first from like a military application. So like we get a bunch of new technology, we get like GPS, we get a bunch of like weather technology that helps us, but it started out as like a thing funded for military purposes, for like space travel. Like it started as like a government thing that eventually makes its way down to like the consumer side. Crypto seems to me very much like this is something that is being created without concern, and for like the entire point is taking the power out of governments that are able to collect money, build armies, do whatever.
Yeah,
and that's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of background on this, but but it's interesting, and I wonder if it's because to build a new technology, you need a shit ton of funding.
Yeah.
Which historically is going to come from the government. So they're going to start developing it with an application that benefits them, which is, probably national defense. Whereas with crypto, you sort of maybe eliminate the need to do. I mean, you eliminate like the crowdfunding issue effectively, assuming that you can, assuming that people buy the token, of course. But I wonder if that's why there's just so much money.
Like I can.
Now there's not really the need to.
I'd say like the military gets out of it maybe surveillance, like people like I don't know. I honestly can't really think also of what a benefit to the military could be from like crypto, from a crypto perspective. You know what I mean?
I don't know. Maybe they want to do anonymous payments, but that's the only thing I could think of.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's a whole host. Hopefully, you'll have somebody on here one day who's closer to it who
Yeah,
can just tell us all the dirty secrets about it.
I remember when my brother first like started talking to me about like crypto beyond like invest in Bitcoin. When he first started talking to me, like, so if no money matters at any point, what are the things that are going to still have value? And he was always talking about identity, but like the first thing that comes to me is like, who has guns, who's going to be able to like build up militaries. Uh, I think it's why. So one of my favorite franchises is Metal Gear Solid, and like that whole theory that it eventually gets to the point of where governments no longer matter. It's all about private military organizations and who has access to money that will pay people to fight wars and shoot stuff. And if you have guns, your video and audio. Ah, ah.
No, I just moved.
Okay.
It was getting too hot. Yeah, I wonder if that speaks to a fundamentally different outlook on the world from you and your brother. If that was the difference in your answers to that question.
Yeah. I mean, it is so like the one of the things that also like one of his questions that kind of stumped me is like what's now the point of one like the United States staying together? What's the point of like countries and states and governments? And like one of the predominant reasons is because we need militaries to protect stuff. We need public needs service in affordable, functional ways. But if we're taking the need for that and making it into like just I don't know. I think it like clashes with my idea also of like what happens with like neo-capitalism, and all of the stuff gets mixed around, and it always goes back to then like who has guns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I can't say that this is something that I've thought deeply about the collapse of all of this, but yeah, I mean, I think identity and reputation certainly, and those are issues that we all talk about a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, I guess just hardware at the end of the day, who has the guns?
On happier notes,
Yeah.
still Pride Month. I was confused. I think
Hmm.
like did Pride start not like with the calendar month?
No, Pride starts in June. June is Pride Month.
Huh. Yeah, I maybe like these last couple
Why?
of weeks are just kind of like blended together. I thought it happened at like right at the end of May or like 10 like 5 days into June. It's like, oh, it's Pride Month now. What about the
Oh,
first 5 days?
I don't
So maybe my calendar's just fucked up.
know. I don't know. Maybe it just took a while for people to finalize their Pride logos and get them out
Hmm.
onto social media. But no, it's technically June. I mean, each bunch of cities have their actual Pride celebrations at different times, and then
Hmm.
there's World Pride, which I actually don't know where it is this year. I want to say Madrid, but I think that might be wrong.
I have no idea whether or
Who
not
knows?
Ukraine does any sort of Pride thing. There is a gay community, but I don't think gay marriage is legal here. I've looked that up.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah,
Go on.
I was in I was in Turkey when marriage was legalized in the U.S. Traveling with a friend of mine when the decision came down.
Hmm.
So yeah, that
Nice.
was what 2015. 2015, yeah.
I think I was working in like a my hometown's like village water department, and it's like
Hmm.
the thing passed, and I just messaged like a gay friend like, "Congrats." Wasn't like a huge thing to me or for me,
Yeah.
but like, I mean,
Mhm.
yay! It was a.
Yeah, right.
I think one of the other more recent like I don't know if it's like a social justice or like a historical rectification thing. When like most of Oklahoma was given back to Native Americans, technically.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Hadn't heard of that.
yeah. Apparently, like 60% or 70% of it was given back to Native Americans for self governance. I don't remember what the law was, but like this, it was a case that went to the Supreme Court, and they won.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of wild. Like
So it reminds me.
you never expect things like that to happen.
No, never, never, no. I mean, I like mm, so Maori own like a large majority of the land,
Mhm.
but that's just been for some reason I don't actually know why at all. But that's just always been part of New Zealand. They were just like a lot chiller with giving land back. So I don't know. Some
Yeah,
countries do better than
I
others, I
really
guess.
have no idea what proper reparations for like Native Americans would be. I think it would be like proper integration, and the best way I could think of would be like integrating them into like the modern healthcare and like public school system,
Yeah.
giving
Hmm.
them access to I think I'm veering a little bit too much into a topic I don't know nearly enough about.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly don't know enough about it besides like my conclusions will be based off of what the Native American community says, you know, they
Mhm.
want and they need and they deserve. So, um, beyond that, that's essentially that's my decision.
Mhm. So back to Pride. You're a part of the LGBTQ plus community. Is there first of all, is
Yes,
there any
yes.
faster way to say that? LGBTQ
I mean, you
LGBTQ
could,
plus.
I, yeah, I mean, I personally don't mind people asking if, part of the queer community.
Mhm.
Um, and then, then I'll typically say like, yeah, I'm gay and I either identify as gay or queer,
Mhm.
which is totally fine with me. But yeah, I think queer is a perfectly acceptable shorthand for it.
I feel like that still has. I get it that there have been like efforts to reclaim it and kind of use it
Hmm.
as like put it on neutral ground. But
Yeah,
I still get the feeling like you refer to somebody's like, oh, that's. I guess if you identify them as, oh, he is a queer, that kind of
yeah, maybe
makes it
like a
offensive.
yeah, maybe like a queer is a little bit strange. And I sort of as I was answering you, I was like, I mean, but I do live in a New York City bubble,
Hmm.
and I am gay, so I use the term queer with people who I know and my friends. I know that I personally wouldn't personally like as an individual wouldn't be offended if somebody asked if I was queer.
Hmm.
Um, but I obviously can't speak for everybody. But I think it's a term that does have a degree of reclamation to it, which I think is attractive and not attractive. That's the wrong word, but I think it's a term that has reclamation to it, and I think it's means a lot for a community to be able to regain it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I personally like it. I think it is ambiguous enough that it describes or it encompasses really all of the nuances of what it means to essentially not be straight,
Hmm.
and all the multiple identities that I don't feel that we should be forced to place names on if people don't want to, or if we don't want to, or if they don't quite know. Um, and so I just think queer is a really nice way to
Succinct.
position this community as succinct, and I think it's a very cohesive and frankly friendly way for people to recognize that the community that we're part of, even though the community itself is super diverse and has a lot of differences to it, part of the core definitions is that it's distinct, it's different
Hmm.
than um, you know the straight community.
Hmm. So like what is Pride is now, I think, getting a lot more recognition for kind of its roots, as like a riot, as protests, which is it's good. I think it's nice that we're finally getting out of like, oh, American history was always peaceful. It was always
Mhm.
Martin Luther King was only like this wise leader. Malcolm X was Malcolm X was the bad one. Martin Luther King
Yeah.
was eloquent and no, these guys were at fucking riots. They were getting their asses beat.
hmm
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I know you and I talked about it, but like, very briefly is,
mhm,
and I mean, obviously, I haven't been in like a modern school curriculum for a while, but at least when I was in school, they sort of ended U.S. history at the Civil Rights Movement.
mhm,
Um, it touched a little bit on the Vietnam War, never on the Gulf Wars or anything. And so, sort of the attitude that you got through was that, hey, World War II happened, and then the Civil Rights Movement happened, and then the U.S. has been perfect ever since. Like
mhm,
the culminations of the problems that the U.S. ever had. And then if anything's been a problem since then, it's all been, on foreign soil. It's never been, at home. Um, Certainly, the gay rights movement is not, or was not, I should say, actively taught
mhm,
at all. At least in like where I went to school. Um, and so I think the history behind it of of Pride being a riot, of these movements starting with certain communities, is frankly completely missed. And when somebody comes out, or at least again, sort of personal experience, and sort of the first things you start seeing are things like big celebrations and pride celebrations. They're fun, they're engaging. It is a really nice way to feel part of something,
mhm.
and for there to be joy and levity around being with people and being out in public somewhere. But you kind of skip over what I think is the part of learning.
Mhm.
And I think for some people, it just takes a few years to sort of turn around and go back and start researching. And that's usually once you know, and I'll just say me, because this is my personal experience. But once you start meeting people and you really start understanding what it was like for the HIV/AIDS epidemic,
Mhm.
what it was like in places like New York and San Francisco and London, and elsewhere, of course. And so you start understanding that, and then you start recognizing that really just like to be gay has for generations just meant a lot of pain,
Mhm.
in many different ways, and a lot of resilience. And I think that that's been a incentive for me and for others that I know to take the time and to go back and to understand where these things, and by these things I mean emerged from, and sort of really fill in the blank spaces of where I think our education sort of led us to believe that the civil rights movement was the last thing that the U.S. had to do to become perfect,
Mhm.
and sort of just glossed over anything to do with the gay rights movement.
But even like with the civil rights thing, they don't mention that like after Martin Luther King got shot, they still waited like a full week before they signed the civil rights stuff. And the reason they signed it was because so many cities were on fire because of riots. The rioting got the civil rights
hmm
movement passed, or it got the civil rights movement to be successful.
hmm
Uh,
Yeah,
and that's something that's just never talked about, you know?
yeah. People don't. Yeah, I mean, I think we as a society that is wrapped up in a lot of ideas of us being number one, we don't like to acknowledge that riots happen, and that a lot of progress in our country has been led by riots
Mm-hmm.
and protests, and not sort of the clean democratic process that we love to think
Which is ironic.
propels everything in the world.
Which is ironic because the American Revolution it started also as a fucking riot.
Yeah, exactly,
Rioting
exactly.
is as
Everything that's
American as apple pie
pushed.
and shooting stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I also, I mean, this is different. It just reminded me when you said that. A professor once said, and I think it was very poignant. It was like every conflict in American history can boil down to federal versus state government,
Mm-hmm.
which is just an interesting think about that.
One thing that I always thought was
That
interesting
might be
is
too simplistic.
one thing I always thought was interesting is that in every single like social rights civil issue, the cops are never on the right side of history.
Yeah. Yeah. hmm Yeah. That is. I mean, yeah, because government isn't.
In same thing in like
Yeah.
in any other country.
hmm
Like yes, there are good ones, but like
hmm
the police force is never on the right side.
Yeah. And even if there is typically, I guess, I think what we found is if there is a military force against the main powers to be,
Mm-hmm.
usually that military force ends up committing atrocities of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, which I maybe isn't as true in American history. I'm trying to think, but I'm just thinking more of like Central and South American history.
Mm-hmm. Any big queer community heroes to you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I like this is gonna sound super corny, um, but really the people who I know and the people who I spend my days with,
Mm-hmm.
um, I didn't have any actually out gay friends in when I was growing up
Mm-hmm.
or in high school or in college. Um, and since then, my best childhood friend has come out,
Mm-hmm.
and then my best friend at high school as well. And we grew to know each other, and we grew to Sorry, one second.
No problem. Lots of flybys.
Yeah, like little seaplanes around here.
Mm.
Um, and so these two people in particular, my childhood friend and friend from high school, we both grew to love each other as friends, with both of us dealing with something internal and struggling. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was miraculous that we didn't let that sort of alienate us from others or
Mm-hmm.
be afraid to know others and be friends with each other. And then since then, since we've all come out following like past the age of even like 22, it was past that. Um, it's really just made us closer, and to see what they've struggled through
Mm-hmm.
and then achieved also. And this also goes with all my other friends who I've met. We all just come from different experiences of growing up gay. Some and never heard a single negative word about it, and then others on the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still this shared um, feeling of displacement and shared feeling of um, alienation sometimes, which can be then completely reversed when you're with these people and you're just somewhere with them, and it's just you all, and you just feel very comfortable and very at home. And so just recognizing how happy and um, really how happy everyone is,
Mm-hmm.
the people who I know and my friends, despite what individually a lot of them have gone through, is like day in and day out extraordinary.
Yeah, I definitely like the best thing that to me that's like come about like pride and just like civil rights movement. So or it's getting more visibility is like people being able to like talk genuinely about themselves and like be like they have they have a seat at the table now. They actually get to talk as people, not as somebody who's like hiding something and they're not allowed to. They shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Which is like incidentally what like the whole idea of pride is, being able to accept who you are and not have to compensate for what might be seen otherwise as a character flaw.
Exactly, which I think I was recently at the Trans Liberation March in Brooklyn, and I forget which of the speakers it was, but they were talking about the idea of celebration, and a lot of what this march was about was just sort of recentering the issues of Black and trans queer community,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of Pride has ignored them.
Yeah.
And obviously so much of American history has been just objectively violence towards that group in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of, and what this particular person said, which I thought was just very compelling, and I haven't heard it framed this way before, was that there's nothing between celebration and anger and protesting. There's nothing, celebrating doesn't mean that you can't stay angry and stay demanding. You can celebrate, being together somewhere with a group of people. You can celebrate the fact that there is this acknowledgement,
Mm-hmm.
big picture of your identity as a queer person, while also being hyper aware and putting it in people's faces of where the shortcomings still are,
Mm-hmm.
where the oppression still is, and being angry about them. You can celebrate with the people who you're with, and then still remain very very upfront about the fact that it's not enough, and there's still a lot of pain, there's still a lot of violence,
Yeah, I think that's
and there's a lot more to do.
I think that's similarly like part of like the point of like comedy also, that as a societal function, being able to make fun of something that people are struggling with, but also like to bring attention to it and make people actually think about it in a way that's technically palatable.
Yeah, I get that. And I think with Pride in particular, and I'll speak personally, I know that I think sometimes there is, how do I say this? So is of course just for people's like livelihood and happiness and health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, to reminding myself about that message of celebration and rage and anger is because for me, like my identity, I don't experience really any of these issues that other people in the queer community do. I'm a man, I'm cis, I'm white, and I'm gay. And if you're living in New York City, if you're living in San Francisco, if you're living in LA, if you're living in most, at least left-leaning places in the US, you're in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also this sort of, I think like almost instinctual desire to run away from pain.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're living somewhere and you've struggled your entire childhood with pain, and you have the opportunity to tell yourself that that pain no longer exists, and that it's totally fine, and that we've reached this, perfect world where I can be who I want to be in New York City, and it's totally fine, and everything's great.
And at least, like, even if you are still like enduring the pain, like that, knowing that it's justified, that your pain is actually real.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying here is, like telling myself that it's all over,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it could feel good sometimes, because it lets me sort of say that now there's this end to anything that's happened in the past, but constantly needing to hear from others in the community that it's not over. There's a lot more work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just about, rights at this point. It's still about like fundamental violence and safety.
Mm-hmm.
I think is a message that, like, frankly, a lot of people in the gay community still need to hear a lot, because there can be this very natural desire just to say that everything is fine. And, I no longer need to feel pain either for myself or others.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would also like add that it's probably very different from like, so because being gay in the States, regardless of whatever state you're in, from also like being gay in a lot of other countries, I guess. I don't know. To me, I think a lot of like the like Pride success in the States and just like the acceptance of like the queer community in the States is helping like lay foundation for other places where the gay community is still being kind of oppressed or whatever. It kind of gives them a working model, hopefully a working model to be able to get equality wherever they are.
Yeah, I hope that's, even if we want to frame the U.S. as the model to operate off of. That's like, yeah, I mean, that's a question I don't have an answer to, unfortunately, but I think it is. I mean, I think people need to also recognize that the US doesn't do a great job. Like, should we actually model our perceptions of, gay healthcare off of the US? Because I would definitely say no.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's interesting because we are definitely moving away from like, the US is the castle on the hill, is the shining light that everybody needs to like look to.
Yeah.
Because like every American who goes anywhere is going to shit talk the shit out of America because there are justifiably a lot of things that are still fucked up.
Yeah, and they're easy to navigate if you have money and you have the knowledge, and you have let's say even just the acceptance to go anywhere, and that's not true for everybody. And I mean, I think healthcare in particular is of course a huge issue.
Healthcare, infrastructure
in the U.S.,
education,
and then
funding.
And when you're talking about gay health, if you can't teach gay sex ed in school, and then you don't make preventative drugs like Truvada possible for people to get.
What's a Truvada?
I mean, like Truvada is a daily pill, and then it protects against HIV.
Oh, okay.
So it was originally a component in some of the early treatments for HIV/AIDS, sort of while they were going through different treatments like AZT, and then that compound was found to be effective in not letting the virus replicate in your cells. So now it's I mean, it's easy to get in, I guess, and it's easy to get if you know the clinic to go to that will pay for it, or if you have the right insurance that will pay for it. But if not, it's a $2,500 monthly supply possible. And it's not like it is probably one of the greatest developments for the prevention of HIV in recent history.
This isn't the drug that
you just don't hear about it.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, go on.
Just that you don't hear about it often. Like, I didn't hear about it until I moved to San Francisco.
I didn't hear about it until
that was
now.
In 2016, I think it first started. Yeah, and it first started coming out. I think it was like in the aughts that it first started coming out. And yeah, I was fortunate. There's a clinic in San Francisco that essentially handheld you through the process of getting the drug. And there's a program, I think, with Gilead and then private donors where you don't have to pay for every month, and that's fine. But I have family out west, and I've been out west, and they have to fly the drug in because they don't have it stockpiled, just because there's not enough education there that people even know that they should be going and getting it if they need it. May not even be taught about the transmission of HIV.
Is this the drug that what's his face? Martin Shkreli. Remember that guy? The most punchable face in the world. I know he bought out like some AIDS medication and like ramped up the price like 3,000%, just like overnight. Is that the same one, or is that a different one?
I'm trying to think if that was him. I don't know. I know he did that with insulin, but I don't know. Maybe he did it with Truvada. I don't remember.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
All right, so you have gotten into cooking. You've learned some baking. What have you gotten around to starting to make? So
when in March of 2020, I left the city with my boyfriend, and we went out to be with my family, who are out in Wyoming. And there's obviously just more space in Wyoming than there is in a Manhattan apartment.
Yeah.
So sort of for the first time,
there's more room in a Wyoming. There's more room in a Wyoming closet than in a Manhattan. apartment.
And so suddenly we had a kitchen to ourselves, practically nothing to do, of course, because it was, springtime. So there was, you couldn't even go skiing, but then there was too much snow to go hiking or anything. So we had a lot of time at home, and it was just us. My sister lives down the road, but nobody else was at my family's place. Just cooked a lot, and my boyfriend is an excellent cook. But certainly more on the like savory side, like on the meals.
What kind of cuisine?
And I mean, truly everything under the sun.
Martian food.
What he's really into, what he's really into in particular is like old cookbooks that are essentially like 300 pages of just dense text, like maybe a couple of sketches, But what he finds is that those cookbooks are the they're sort of core ones that teach certain cuisines really from the ground up, and not so much sort of the modern cookbooks, which
where do you find these?
Gloss over some of that. Well, they're old. So there's one by
you have to like go to the library and he like blows off the dust on it.
Yeah. There's one from an Indian woman who wrote it, I think it was in the 70s or something, and she's basically considered like the godmother of the adoption, like mainstream adoption of Indian cuisine in the US. She wrote this. It's basically like the basics of Indian cooking, and which is great. So he cooks from that a lot. And there's also another one, and again, from a chef whose name I'm forgetting, but she did the same for Italian cuisine in the US. So it's not a modern Italian cookbook. It's like dense and thick, and it's like from the very stage of like, making everything from scratch and doing all that. So he makes a lot of fresh pastas, makes a lot of Indian and Thai cuisine. He has like his staples that he makes often. There's like a salmon salad dish, which is delicious. And then, but he's very experimental. And I am just in general just a very precise person. I feel much better with order and structure, at least in like measurements. Exactly. Like clear instructions. And so baking is I just gravitate towards it more than sort of the, like, let's just see what happens with, cooking.
Got to taste it all the time. Can't do that with baking.
So exactly. Yeah. I was baking a lot of breads just because there's like some simple no knead bread things. I tried sourdough a couple of times. I was trying to use my sister's sourdough starter. Didn't work. So that was a bust. And then something else that I really enjoyed making and frankly did very well were kouign-amanns, which are these. They're sort of analogous, I guess, a little bit to almost like a cross between a croissant and a monkey bread.
Monkey bread?
Like, you bake them in a. It's like you can pull the top off, and it's usually a lot of cinnamon or maple.
I have no idea what this is.
Pull the little bobs off the top. No.
So a cross between a croissant and a monkey bread.
You have a layered dough like you do with. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like I guess a cinnamon roll, like a croissant and a cinnamon roll, sort of.
Okay.
Like cross between those. It's delicious. It's really, really good. So I was doing that a lot in Wyoming. There was the flour shortage. So once we got over the flour shortage,
there was a flour shortage.
A lot. Yeah, I don't know if that was elsewhere, but there was no flour in Wyoming.
Really?
There was like probably 1,500 pounds or tons of meats in all of these, places. But no flour, no beans, no rice, no flour, no like stable pantry items.
Oh wow!
I think people thought that they would be surviving off of bread and water for.
Yeah. Do you think it was like the hoarder pandemic logic that like caused it, or was it? Do you think it was more of like a supply chain thing?
Oh yes, yeah. No, it was 100%. No, it was. I mean, I'm sure there maybe was a supply chain thing, like with toilet paper. How that really at the end of the day was a supply chain issue. But I think it was the hoarder mentality. Like the grocery stores were gutted. And we did that when like in early March, I started going to the grocery store, like going to Trader Joe's and being like, we should just stock up on stuff, not really knowing what's going to happen, but also not wanting to seem crazy, So I didn't want to go and buy like 800 cans of beans. So I tried to go into Trader Joe's and like pick things off and not seem crazy, but the shelves would be every day completely gutted. So I'd come home with the weirdest things. it was useless. But I think which I don't blame anybody really. I mean, none of us have been through something like that before. So much anxiety, so much wrong information.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there was. I think people could have dealt with it better, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no right way to act.
I think
in that situation, but it definitely impeded my baking abilities.
I think one of like the funniest things about like the whole pandemic thing to me was that like it was an otherwise still like relatively like he killed a bunch of people, but still a comparatively less like less like lethal. Like it was like a super flu, essentially, right?
Yeah, it
like,
was,
and that kind of like brought the world to its knees. It wasn't like a zombie apocalypse or anything. You just need to like poke holes and show that like the healthcare system in a lot of places and just like pandemic response in the US specifically is broken, and that's all that happened, and like destroyed the American economy, destroyed a lot of the world economy.
Yeah, I mean, it was not nearly as deadly as the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
It wasn't nearly as deadly as SARS. Wasn't nearly as deadly as MERS. Granted, SARS and MERS didn't have the same virality and the ability to spread.
Mm-hmm. But it wasn't like.
But there's no reason.
It wasn't like Ebola, where like children were being born with like defects and stuff.
But that's also like core to what makes a virus. Like viruses that are too deadly can't spread, kill, or incapacitate people too quickly. Like it's one of those things where the scariest diseases, at least from their symptoms, like the reason that Ebola is, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'll preface this, but the reason that Ebola I think is so scary to people is how graphic it's described. Like it's described as such a gruesome disease. It's a cinematic disease. And of course we've had like devastating outbreaks of Ebola. A lot of that boils down to cultural practices of burying the dead and of density and of education around how it spreads. But the Ebola virus isn't hyper contagious like a flu is or like coronavirus is. So I guess then when it gets scary is we think of like crossovers, which is scary to think about.
Well, at that time also we had like somebody who treated it actually like a disease. Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
With COVID,
didn't politicize it.
With COVID, where it became like a political a battle line in politics of like whether or not you believe COVID is a problem.
Believe COVID, and then it was if you believe COVID is a problem.
Yeah, so I think this kind of like brings us to what your so you wrote a zine piece for the Mochi zine, which came out in April, right? Yeah, so the piece you did was about
yes, I mean it's actually
was it hookworms? It was hookworms?
Hookworm,
yeah. And how much like that process mirrored what happened with the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
How did you come across that? Like
and it was something that I've been thinking. Yeah. So I knew about it. I knew about this hookworm epidemic just from the past in the States. And I had just done some research. There's something called newspapers.com, inventive name. And it's basically just screens. Yeah, right. It's just copies of old newspapers, but like back as far as you can imagine, all over, all over. And then they scan them so you can word search. And it's fun just to poke around there. Like you find some pretty cool stuff and you realize how wild our journalism used to be. And so, looking at hookworm, it was just super. I mean, so like first a little bit of background. Hookworm has a really fascinating lifestyle, or a life cycle. There's two types of hookworm, colloquially called like old world hookworm and new world hookworm. So there's the hookworm that was in Europe that was very widely known and understood.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference, and I might mix up specifically which it is, but the mouth of the hookworm in Europe it's like circles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mouth of the hookworm in the US is like slits. So they attach to the intestines differently.
Okay.
That's really like their biggest biological difference. So hookworm was never thought to be in the Americas, and certainly not in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't until an American doctor who had been trained in Germany, so had been trained to recognize the symptoms of hookworm, because it was like normal to diagnose somebody with hookworm, came back to the US, was traveling around the South, and was like, these people are exhibiting symptoms of hookworm.
Mm-hmm.
And what hookworm does is hookworm burrows into your flesh through the soft skin,
Mm-hmm.
most commonly between the toes, or it could go like between the hands. So it doesn't burrow up into the sole of your feet. It burrows into the webbing of your toes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it travels up your bloodstream, travels into your lungs. When you cough or when you clear your throat and then you swallow,
Mm-hmm.
you're essentially coughing up phlegm from your lungs and then you're swallowing it. So you're coughing up these larvae, which I don't know if they're still larvae at that stage, whatever stage in life they are. So you cough them up and then you swallow. So then they go into your intestines and then they make their way down to their intestines. And then that's when they hook on
Mm-hmm.
to your intestines. And then they start giving birth to eggs. You defecate the eggs. If you, are defecating somewhere that either just like on soil or somewhere that doesn't have strong sewage, that mixes in with the water, with the ground. And then a child's outside running barefoot, something that has some sewage water in it, and,
Mm-hmm.
it burrows into them. So what's interesting is that each hookworm that you are infected with has individually entered your body. They can't like multiply within your body.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what kind of makes you
eggs, but the eggs have to leave your body.
So, but like the symptoms are they mostly connected to like the respiratory stuff, or is it one of the ways
not at all. So the symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah. The symptoms are anemia. So
Mm-hmm.
so with your throat, like you're clearing your throat a lot more than you recognize. So that's just like a normal life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The main symptom, or like the main signifying symptom, like the one that really makes it obvious that you have it, is if your toes itch a lot. It's called ground itch or dew itch. Like something else you can look up in newspapers.com is ground itch or dew itch, and it's all about hookworm. But the main symptom, like the main big picture symptom, the reason it's an issue is because it causes anemia.
Mm-hmm.
And if a child has severe anemia early on, then everything about them is going to slow down from a development perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they just later puberty, a slower mental development, much slower physical development. It's the same as a child having severe anemia.
Mm-hmm. So how did you start kind of like researching and like thinking about its parallels, at least the way that the people responded to being told that they had like a hookworm? How did you find those parallels between the hookworm epidemic and the COVID pandemic?
So I started off by just as doing research around hookworm, and this was even before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Had recognized that what the main issue was with hookworm in the South was that the treatment was funded by Rockefeller,
mm-hmm. Which is like the equivalent of like Bill Gates, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. So Rockefeller gave $1 million to the treatment of hookworm and basically deployed a bunch of northern doctors
mm-hmm.
to go around the South and treat people. And so this is post-Civil War, post-Reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
The South hasn't been doing well economically. The North is in the middle of this extreme, modernization, industrialization.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a very time for the South. And so what I realized just by generally researching hookworm, because hookworm is an easy thing to research, like mm-hmm. it's an easy thing to search. You're not going to get stuff that's not about hookworm if you're Googling or if you're searching for hookworm on newspapers.com, And what I realized is that these issues of Rockefeller came over again. And usually it was like, basically like, fuck Rockefeller. This isn't an issue and the South can deal with this ourselves,
Mm-hmm. But then,
So
also
there's
like
that
the evolution into maybe this is a problem, but we can solve it
Exactly.
without your medicine. The medicine that you would give us is going to kill people.
Mhm. Yep. So then like also looking, then you saw that, which was like outright denial, and then you saw some that were like, okay, fine, it's an issue, but like we can deal with it ourselves. We don't need your money.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this like, it's an issue and you need to get away because you're trying to hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're giving us lies, you're trying to hurt us. And then there's just also this narrative of like, oh, actually, the reason that the South hasn't been doing well, and by hasn't been doing well, we mean the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
Reconstruction, not developing, is because of hookworm. So even using it as a reason that the South, lost the Civil War effectively, like putting hookworm over Southern history and trying to say it's not actually anything to do with us. Like we are not worse in the South. We just happen to have this hookworm. So you had all these different arguments, and I tried to figure out why they were changing and how they were evolving over time.
Mm-hmm.
And it just ended up being, it was chronological. So it started off with outright denial. This isn't an issue, all of that. And then it sort of turned into acknowledgement and acceptance, but blended with conspiracy that Rockefeller's trying to get the doctors in here. He's trying to investigate us, trying
Mm-hmm.
to watch our bodies, all these things. Turned into conspiracy trying to kill people with the medicine, which worked, but was very, very specific. And if you administered it yourself, or if you like, or something, you could die.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's that whole thing. And then it just turned into this, like it eventually evolved into, oh, well, actually, we can deal with this ourselves, but it's good to know that we lost the Civil War because of hookworm. And, like, our education isn't as good as the North's because hookworm, and our children aren't learning as quickly, and just used as a really effective way out for the South, which isn't what we're seeing yet with COVID. But for those first ones, it's very much what we're seeing. I think for hookworm, it was framed as North versus South, really,
Mm-hmm.
like along the Mason-Dixon, the Civil War line, North and South. Obviously for COVID, framed more as left versus right. But there was outright denial of it existing. There was denial of it being serious. Oh, it's just a flu, or it's not even a flu, 0.001%, whatever it is. And then there was, of course, the whole conspiracy element and identifying the person who is the cause of all of this or is making all this work. And so I think that those are interesting parallels, but the diseases themselves are fundamentally different. It's not like this was a respiratory disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like this was even an easily transmissible disease, hookworm. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that these arguments emerge when you're talking about a certain type of disease. These arguments apparently emerge whenever the U.S. is going through a health crisis, of these sort of tiers and flavors and nuances of denial and rejection and conspiracy. And so, I thought it was interesting to write about in that article, through these sort of patterns of conspiracy. Is this something that was a fluke and it happened to be that 100 years apart, these two arguments were the exact same, or does this speak to something broader about how the U.S. responds to these medical issues, and draws them over political regional belief lines? And I think we'll see, how the coronavirus argument emerges. And something else that's missing here that I'd love to go back and do some more research on is the Spanish flu,
Mm-hmm.
and see how those conversations were
I was just about to ask about that.
in America. Yeah. So I didn't do that for the scope of this one, but hopefully soon.
So what brought you first to hookworm? You said you were just like really into like researching hookworm. What's up with that?
Really into so really I've so like big picture diseases fascinate me. They absolutely fascinate me.
Mm-hmm.
And really interesting parasitic life cycles fascinate me in particular. Just the nuance behind a parasite's life cycle is wild.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely wild. like there's a parasitic wasp, figs that we know and love. Speaking of fig mochi, those are almost all fig species, maybe even all fig species, are pollinated by parasitic wasps.
Huh.
When you eat a fig, there is a non-zero chance that you're eating the larvae of a wasp, because the wasp crawls in there, or the dead body, I guess the adult of a wasp. The wasp crawls in there, gives birth, and then those little baby wasps fly out and then go elsewhere. Species has a specific wasp species that is optimized for the fig, that specific fig. And there are obviously a shit ton of fig species. We only eat a couple of them. But figs are also some of the only fruits year round, because wasps are always breeding. So wasps found it. Evolution happened, but wasps found a tree, a fruit, or the fruit found a parasitic host that would be year round. This also means that in wintertime, or if there are droughts or something, figs are often an animal's last resort food. The years where figs make up the majority of a diet of a bear, let's say, because there just isn't any other food besides figs. And over and over again, we find these very, very precise, specific life cycles for parasites. So in general, I just think that's a fascinating subject. And then by doing a bunch of time researching American history, and in particular Southern history versus Northern history in school, I just heard about this hookworm issue. Not colloquially, like offhand, post Reconstruction, here was an interesting thing, this hookworm thing. And so it just kind of sat in the back of my mind. And then I was poking around every once in a while on that site and learning more about it. And then this is the thing that I not that I love this, but I just think it really speaks to how this degree of denial is going to be an issue. In Alabama, and I think it was 2017, hookworm was found again in people, completely eradicated from the United States. And then it was found that in some of the poorest areas of Alabama, hookworm wasn't just prevalent, it was prominent. It was in a considerable percentage of the people who were examined. And this big picture, big picture goes back to a Texas doctor whose name I'm forgetting, but he became the spokesperson for essentially the measles, like anti-vaxxers. So I guess pro-vaxxing. And he specializes in emerging diseases. So what he specializes in is in diseases that haven't been around for a while, but are starting to pop up again. So he was obviously very on the front lines of something like measles, which hadn't been around, and then suddenly was popping up again. And his biggest argument for the last decade has been that some of the people who are most susceptible in the world are not the people who we would think of, like not people in developing countries, even though they are certainly susceptible, but there's a unique susceptibility to the poorest people of the richest nations. So the poorest people in the US are uniquely at a disadvantage with respect to not having access to anything that they need, infrastructure, healthcare, anything, which makes them open to these emerging diseases, which then expose the rest of the country to these emerging diseases as well.
So why would it be also why the poorest people in the richest countries? Not
necessarily more so than people in developing countries. But he was just saying, oftentimes we shift our focus externally to foreign countries, and we like to think that
we don't have those problems
because hegemony, we don't have these issues. But if we are going to see let's just get intent. Like if we're going to see an outbreak of cholera in the United States, it's going to originate with the poorest zip code in the wealthiest, state, let's say, and then that could spread everywhere.
Interesting. Yeah, you didn't.
Yeah, I quickly find his name.
You didn't mention any of your fascination with parasites in your bio. I think that's a very interesting thing that arises out of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's my friends make fun of me a lot for like I'm very much I'm just super interested in parasites. I'm like very cautious of America's and the world's overuse of antibiotics.
Hmm.
I sometimes get a little psychotic about it, but I think it's all fascinating things, and probably going to be one of the bigger health crises um, soon.
So
Like
we're like
antibiotics
worried about
resistance.
the super bugs.
Yeah, superbugs.
Hmm.
Something that this like story that I love saying is the first person to ever be treated with penicillin
Hmm.
in a clinical setting was a British police officer, and he had walked into his garden, and a rose thorn had scraped him on the cheek,
Hmm.
tiny scrape, and the infection spread, and he lost his eye and a good chunk of his brain. And
Wow.
penicillin was like the treatment of last resort. They're like, we don't even know what to do or what this is, but we're gonna like give it to this random guy so he doesn't die. And it was a scrape, barely a scrape.
Holy shit.
And now penicillin, yeah, insane. Also, something else I love is when they found out that penicillin was working, they had to find a way that it was growing naturally so they could culture it and then get it, to grow more.
Hmm.
And so they brought in melons from all over the world. And it was a melon from like some tiny, it might have been like Topeka in the US
Hmm.
or like Indiana or something. That was the melon that was best optimized to grow penicillin on.
I didn't know penicillin grew on
Crazy.
melons.
Yeah, well, and I don't think anymore, but when they were first trying to culture it and figure out like how to get the best penicillin to grow in a lab.
Hmm. You you know anything about the just like on the topic of parasites? You play or The Last of Us at all?
What is it?
The Last of Us. It's a Naughty Dog game.
No,
It's
no, I haven't.
there's like a pandemic, and it's related to the cordyceps parasite. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, I haven't actually.
Cordyceps. It's like a
No,
it's a
I'm
it's
not,
a
unfortunately.
it's a parasite. It's known as like the zombie parasite that like it gets into ants, and then it like makes them it like
Oh,
get
yes. Oh, yes. Okay. This is,
yeah, it's a fungus
yeah.
that gets into their brain and then makes them like go climb up onto like leaves so that they're going to be able to so that they can be eaten by birds or something. Where the cordyceps like
Isn't that
have
crazy?
yeah. So The Last of Us like
It grows out of their brain.
The Last of Us is it's a mutation. A mutation of cordyceps gets into people, and so it's like
Oh, interesting.
it's a parasite based zombie virus essentially.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah.
Second one came out. I'm still waiting to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said you've been trying to get into different like animes, mangas. I think video games also. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Video games more so. Trying to figure out, essentially like, I know that I really want to start doing it more.
Hmm.
I just need to find the proper setup to start doing it, and probably even find like a guide to just get me onboarded to a few things. Like I know that I can take the time and do the research and figure it out myself. But there's sort of that like getting over the hill. It seems like there's a lot more hardware to take into account nowadays
Hmm.
than when I was working
Yeah,
or when I was starting to play when I was younger.
I think Last of Us is specifically like a PlayStation game. Um,
Hmm.
what kind of things are you kind of like looking for? What stories like stand out to you? So you're a writer. You do a bunch of writing on your own. Um,
Hmm.
what
Yeah,
what kind of stories
two
really
types of
speak to you?
stories. Yeah, I'd say one is magical realism.
Hmm.
I just think it's like I think it's a really the reason I love magical realism is
So give an
bringing
example
in
of
the
what.
extraordinary. So like Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, those are like the two like big magical realism people. Haruki Murakami is another one. It really emerged uniquely, not uniquely, but there are a lot of Central and South American authors who specialize in magical realism. Not specialize, but they just happen to be magical realism authors. I don't know if the history of that is uniquely that area for magical realism, but magical realism would just be like very casually mentioning that, you know, someone you know can see into the future, or very casually mentioning that, you know, that something, you know, extraordinary or fantastical has happened. You're not building a world. You're not building a Harry Potter world that has to be distinct. It's the normal world. It's the normal world in all the normal settings, and these extraordinary things are mentioned. The reason I love it is that they're mentioned, and they're so mundane. And I just love the way that it's talked about. Sort of like a casual, off the cuff, you know, mentioning that something's happened, which cannot happen in the real world. So like, you know, this story, if there's too much background noise, let me know.
Okay.
I can go outside. So like, you know, something that I'm writing, basically what I'm trying to write is it's set in the American South. And so, you know, there's this main character, Pearl. And so very early on in the story, essentially the idea I'm going for is, you know, I say something along the lines of like, you know, it was a well-known fact that Pearl's mother was an angel, and then I just like keep on talking about like other things, and I just and I mean there's more to that, but there's just little things like that I really appreciate, and I think bestows a lot of wonder on a normal story.
Yeah, I feel like
I really like
it
that, and then
it does introduce like a nice element of like spirituality, mysticality, and like otherwise mundane things that are going on.
Yep. It's definitely more mystical. It's not anything close to fantasy. But then on that angle of fantasy, I really want to try to get into epic novels. Like, I'm not sure if I'm really going to lean into Game of Thrones, probably just because, I don't know, like I'm sure the books are better than the TVs, but I would rather engage with, you know, brand new material. Sort of idea of, you know, epic multi-series fantasy novels. I'm really eager to learn more about and to start getting into. Just trying to lean back into my roots. I think sometimes it feels like an exhaustion of academia, and just sort of go like hardcore in the opposite direction.
I would say
so, not that there's not an academic element to sci-fi and fantasy and all that. Just saying.
If I had to make recommendations, just off the top of my head, so like a TV show, like it's pseudo anime. The Avatar: The Last Airbender series.
Of course, yeah.
Amazing story.
I was on a client call the other day. Yeah, I was on a client call the other day, and I referenced something from Avatar, and everyone's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So
everything was different when the Fire Nation attacked.
Yeah, exactly. It's good. It's really good. They've never made a good movie adaptation, but that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, apparently Brian Konietzko and I think something Dante DiMartino, the two creators, apparently they got the license free from Nickelodeon, so they are actually going to be, I don't know if they're going to be starting a new series or if they're just going to be writing more material, but it's something that everybody in the Avatar community is super excited about.
Yeah, psyched about it.
Do you want to know about Legend of Korra?
Yeah.
Both these two main lines, they've got some like extended comic series that happen like between and after the stories that happen within the cartoon. I recently finished them all. All super good stories. Like you learn about what happens with Zuko's mom.
Yeah, I think I need to lean in. I haven't watched Legend of Korra, so I definitely need to go back and do that one.
It's a good show. It's definitely a good successor. It has some problems, but it's still an altogether pretty good series.
Yeah, nice.
Another really cool anime I definitely think is like good if you're trying to get into it. So I could also recommend like a really big manga. It's definitely like it's the manga Odyssey, honestly. It's such a big, colossal work. One Piece is like the enormous work, and like the writing for it is stupendous, and the character work is amazing. Um, but then if
Hmm.
you want like a smaller, more concise, but like still a pretty tight story, Full Metal Alchemist,
Okay.
great
You
story.
kept these from me, but yeah, I'd love to jump into them.
You said you were interested in
Nice.
you've been interested in like working on a novel. What kind of so you said you related to the magical realism aspect. Uh,
Yeah.
so the thing you were mentioning with Pearl, this is from that story that you're kind of
Hmm.
working on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I have bits and pieces that I've written, and sort of everything is piecing together to a broader arc.
Hmm.
Um, and I like what I really enjoy are stories, again, like magical realism novels that happen in towns where like they're multi-generational.
Hmm.
So the idea for this one is to be multi-generational. Um, so yeah, it's moving along. It's it's not a priority right now.
Hmm.
I work on it, when I can every once in a while, but hopefully I can
Multi
switch gears and make it a priority in the near future.
kind of reminds me of like It, Stephen King's It. Technically, it's not multi generational,
Yeah.
but it's like within
Hmm.
reality, like an alien comes and it feeds off of people like once every 40 years or something.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like across families. Yeah, I get what you mean.
Then there's also
Yeah,
Stranger Things, I think. At least like the first, I heard the first two seasons are good.
definitely. They're good. They're really good. Yeah. So this one is exactly it starts. But the idea is that it's a German Texas family, just because
Hmm.
there's a lot of history with the German Texas family in the 1800s. And then one part German Texas family, the other part's like a Texas family. And yeah, a lot of it really actually anchors around Pearl, who my idea is she'd be sort of the one constant force in all the generations.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
so
kind of like Keanu Reeves.
we'll see how it evolves. Yeah, exactly.
So you journeys and stuff in Mochi. You've mentioned like you do things that are related to work, but also specifically kind of practicing writing stuff. What would you say is your approach with writing things? Do you start at like do you start at the premise and write and then just see where it takes you, or do you kind of have like an end goal when you try writing? Because you also do stuff for
No,
like content and uh
yeah, I when I'm writing for myself like novel stuff
mhm,
or short story stuff, I just sit down and I write whatever comes to me.
mhm.
I've sort of had to get over the idea of like being stressed about writing something that I don't like. It's really just about getting into the flow, and that can take or it can take 30 minutes to get into a flow. When I'm writing for like work, what I do is I have a really robust outline, and typically I find that outline sort of gets me into the flow because I look at the structure of what I need to research.
Mhm.
And then as I'm researching, I'll start writing. And then at one point or another, something will click and I'll be able to write a whole section before I have to jump back and research. Um,
Mhm.
and so I usually just see this outline like get bigger and bigger and bigger and flow out.
Interesting. Yeah, I tried doing a journey for like writing for an hour a day. It was
Sorry, there.
it was
So yeah.
hor it was horrible. I almost never did any writing. Yeah, writing is tough. Uh,
um, Robin, I actually have to jump at the hour. Sorry.
okay. We're at an hour
Yeah.
30. We're I think we're pretty good. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Any
Yeah.
well, you want to plug your gram or something? I don't know.
Actually, surprisingly, I don't have anything I know, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think if I should be plugging. I don't have anything to plug.
Your zine piece was awesome.
I'm just very happy to be here. Thank you.
Your zine piece was awesome in the Mochi non-zine, non-conspiracy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bugs in the System was excellent. Yeah. Follow him. Follow Everett on Twitter. All right. Thanks for coming on. It was a wonderful conversation.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin.
Yeah, man. Have a good rest of your day. And I'll take us out.
Sure. Talk soon.
Yep. Adios.